Hi everyone, we're going to get started. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ryan and I work here at DataCamp on the marketing team. Today's webinar guest is Tanya Casciarelli, the CEO of TCB Analytics, a Boston-based data consultancy. Tanya started her career in bioinformatics over 15 years ago and has applied her experience to other industries such as healthcare, finance, retail, and sports. So without further ado, Tanya, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Thanks, DataCamp, for having me. Um, this is a talk that I've been fortunate enough to give at Strata and a couple other places, but it was updated recently just for this webinar. So you should see a little bit of new content and just updated statistics. With that, let me just get into my brief intro. As like he said, I started my career in bioinformatics and healthcare. This is just a timeline. I won't bore you with my entire life story, but uh, really 2005 was when I first started diving into R and genomic expression data and was working in the personalized medicine space. And then this break here is when I really started to transition a little bit out of healthcare and apply those learnings to other verticals such as telecom and learned some in distributed computing. I found my way back to healthcare actually in 2015 and then decided to start TCB Analytics. And here we are about 4 years later. And I have to mention my office assistant, Porkchop. He's here. Hopefully you don't hear him much today. He's usually pretty quiet. First things first, let's just talk about what is a data scientist because no one seems to really know still. I want to give a little bit backstory on how I got started. In 2005, I was working at Children's Hospital as an intern, undergrad intern, a co-op student for 6 months, and all I really was told was, "You're going to learn this thing called R. Here's brain cancer data set from mice, their gene expression levels, and we want you to use gene set enrichment to understand mechanisms of brain cancer potentially." So of course my jaw dropped, and I was a second year computer science student and never heard of R. And it looked like this at the time. There was no data camp. Stack Overflow was even really a thing yet. I think they launched in 2008 or so. So all I really had was the CRAN documentation, and I went home that summer. This was me. I printed it all out, and I'll probably all 200 pages of CRAN, and just started reading. And I was pretty intimidated at first. I was working amongst all these really bright PhDs, and was fortunate to do that and learn a lot from them. But I was pretty intimidated. Now, from that, I did end up learning quite a bit about R in the 6 month co-op, and started to feel really comfortable just diving in and learning and being mentored by some people. So I started to think about jobs, of course, and there was this job posting in 2008, and this is one of the I can't take credit for digging this up, the sources in the slide, but this is what historians believe to be the first data scientist job posting. Uh, it was at LinkedIn, and the thing that stood out was no specific technical skills are required. We will help you learn SQL and Python and R, and we don't even really care about some of this statistics data mining program, right? You'll learn it, but we care more about intellectual sharpness and creativity. So what happened? Well, I always like to say hashtag blame Drew Conway because he came out with this, and this is obviously a joke, but he came out with this Venn diagram, which was pretty reasonable about what a data scientist does. And so at the center, you've got data science, you've got hacking skills, which is like all your command line and scripting, and some machine learning in here, which has combines some domain knowledge in math and statistics, domain expertise, right? So that was, I thought, reasonable. Um, and then we started to see an explosion of these Venn diagrams. And this just it got a little ridiculous because now you've got data scientists. Actually, Drew Conway's Venn diagram is embedded within this diagram. We've got the head of IT, the salesperson, the IT guy, the accountant, and I think we've probably all seen job descriptions where they do expect you to do all this stuff effectively. You need to know the business. You need to be able to communicate. Um, And then it kept going. And we've got now statistical computing is apparently separate from computational statistics. We have some acronyms in here that I'm not even sure of. I think let's look around, data structures is fine, but then we start to see things like rasterizing, vector graphics. I mean, obviously you can just go get a degree in um, design on your spare time. And it just kept going. Me and some data science friends actually collected all of these just kind of in a Google Doc as a joke, just to um, laugh about just how ridiculous some of them started to get. So no one really agrees, right? And then Mara Averick, you may know her better as Data and Me, had a couple funny ones. This is what she calls the data science Cthulhu. I thought it looked like a sombrero or an octopus. Jenny Bryan had a Drew Conway's original Venn diagram having a baby with Hadley's Venn diagram, and we get this disaster. And then Mikhail Popov just made one out of a complete joke that data science is in the center here. Capitalism and loneliness. We've got bees, beer, right? So it obviously became just pretty much a running joke that these Venn diagrams and the job description requirements were getting out of hand. So remember the job description I showed at LinkedIn. Now look at this. This is for an internship, by the way, a junior data scientist. Python, C++, Python again, Perl. We've got PySpark. You should know MongoDB, key value stores, Hadoop. I mean, just one of these, you can get an entire PhD in, right? I know someone that went for his master's in just studying the ins and outs of Hadoop and the HDFS file structure. And then here's another one over on the right. You're not only a web developer, you could do all of these things with Node.js and PHP and jQuery, but you're also a maps expert and geospatial. You've got machine learning here, developing new algorithms, and this is 1 year of consulting experience. I don't know how really anyone is an expert in all of these things. And then here's another thing that we need to avoid, and I'll talk about some of these ways to resolve this and what we should be doing better. But all of these articles coming out to test true data science knowledge and 5 signs that you are not a data scientist. You're not a data scientist. So this is just something that's not helpful as a field. It's not welcoming. It's asking questions that are just usually not relevant. For example, can you invert a binary tree? If you can't, you're not a real data scientist, right? There's just so many things wrong with this mentality. And then there's unrealistic requirements as well. So an IBM Burning Glass survey posted that 39% of data scientist postings require an advanced degree. Now take a look at these data science jobs or data related jobs, and then look at data scientists. The thing we're focusing on here is this higher education requirement. See, data-driven decision makers, 5%, but 40% almost for data scientists and advanced analysts. They're saying you need a master's, you need a PhD. Well, no one's pumping out that kind of level of analyst quickly enough because we know that the demand is greater than the supply. So this was updated recently from the last time I gave this talk because it was about 2016 or 17. There was a national surplus of people with data science skills. And now 3 years later, the shortage is present in almost every large US city based on this LinkedIn workforce report. So a national shortage of about 150,000 people with data science skills, particularly in the cities, of course, New York City, San Francisco, LA. And this is because more industries are relying on big and not so big data to make decisions. But supply is increasing. So this is a great read. I recommend everyone after this give the article on the bottom left here by Vicky Boykis a read. She describes a problem surrounding candidates that are coming out with data science skills from all these. There's a ton of these educational programs now, right? Things like Data Camp are great because we're educating people enough to start being confident and learn how to learn and then apply what they're learning. But the problem with that too is that we're getting a lot of junior talent, uh, which is good because in a few years we're going to have more senior level talent once they gain experience in the field and apply these practices. And so I really like this quote that the continuing media hype cycle around data science has enormously exploded the amount of junior talent available on the market over the past 5 years. It's the exact same thing we saw with software engineering 20 years ago. Everyone wanted to get into it. It was the hot field. No one knew what it was, but it slowly matured. And we've got more modular components of software engineering now. So how do we deal with this problem? Uh, you need to find your ideal candidate, right? But how do you find the right person with all of this increasing volume of candidates, these ridiculous requirements, and just a shortage of senior level talent? Number one is understand your organization's goals and pain points. You may not need senior level talent. You may only need a junior analyst. Think about how you plan on addressing challenges with data. So often we hear that people just want to hire data scientists because they have data and they don't know what to do with it. Trust me, put a data scientist or a data nerd in a room alone with a bunch of data, we'll get into the weeds and just go around and around in circles if we don't have clear business goals, value added direction, questions that we need to answer. And then understand your data. Do you actually have a big data problem? Or is it a messy data problem? Is it disparate? Is it in different sources? Do you need to just do an assessment, understand what's there, figure out what can be a value add, and start with your small data? I see a lot of organizations building out these massive on-prem Hadoop clusters, and they haven't even proven out with small data that they can extract any business value from it. So prove it out first before you go and scale out massive and costly infrastructure. And then what skill sets currently exist within your organization? So you want to make sure to complement what you already have. If there are people that are willing to learn and they understand your domain, it's a good idea to first try to train those people up, hire the senior level talent if you need it to help train those people, um, but really address what you need. And speaking of what you need, between the junior level and senior level, there's a big disconnect, I think. I see a lot of this, which we all know Excel is a super powerful tool. A lot of people can do it well now at this point. A lot of people do some unimaginable acts with Excel that are far beyond my capabilities. But then there's this jump, and this isn't a big one. This is, can we get people effective using basic R, basic Python, some basic dashboarding to just manipulate data, bring it together, do some basic cleansing, and then display it and gain some insights. This is more in your analytics side of things. Then there's this. There's a huge leap to doing, for example, causal Bayesian machine learning. That's where your PhDs come in, and if you need people that are developing algorithms and applying really advanced math and concepts, that's a huge difference. And we kind of have data science encompassing this whole world. And in teaching R and Python and this type of stuff to people in boot camps, I've seen people go from here to here and become drastically more effective at their job. They have now more a reproducible workflow. They're able to make really cool interactive plots and charts. And this can be done in part-time courses. This, however, is where, do you actually need it? I would say only 15 to 20% of the work we do here at TCB is machine learning based, where a lot of it is around reporting. So what skills actually really matter? I conducted a poll, and I'm fortunate to have a Slack community of a lot of data geeks that I ask, and we asked about 300 people, what is the most important attribute you look for when hiring a data scientist? Now, these are opinions from both senior level and junior level data scientists or people that have been in a hiring position. And out of all these, right, knowledge of algorithms, strong statistical skills, etc., the top answers, probably not surprisingly, were problem solving, curiosity, followed by communication. A lot of this can be learned, but the top two really drive cultural fit and curiosity, and just the curiosity to solve problems with data is hugely valuable. And I really like this Venn diagram too from Becoming Data Sci on Twitter. I have the source down here, but she highlights curiosity, communication, and creative problem solving as being the most important key factors when hiring a data scientist. The other thing is we need to build a team that meets your needs. So do you need a statistician, for example, to do that really complex advanced machine learning, building recommendation systems, for example, at like the Amazons and Netflixes of the world? Or do you need a business and data analyst who's going to take disparate Excel sheets and put them together into coherent, concise, executive level dashboards? Do you need an engineer who is someone that will make the data available in some kind of relational database or key value store and allow the business and data analysts to access and explore the data, as well as your statisticians? So keep these concepts in mind when you're hiring a great team instead of holding out for one person that does all of this really well. It's going to be, number one, really difficult to find, really expensive, and they're on a path for clear burnout. And I've definitely been there. Clearly define the goals for your data team. Again, understand what you're trying to accomplish. We can play with data all day, but at the end of the day, if we're not advancing business decisions, supporting business decisions, then what really are we doing? And then understand the measures of success for your roles. So they should have 3-6 month plans laid out of here's what I expect you to accomplish, here's where we need to get to, and this helps, of course, in evaluating and doing just a performance evaluation after their first 6 months or so. And there'll be questions at the end. I just want to for everyone to keep that in mind. So think about the questions. I'm happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. So let's talk about interviewing, everyone's favorite topic, techniques that won't chase away your candidates. Whiteboarding. I like to call it the waterboarding of tech interviews. I think a lot of places do it because they had to go through it maybe, and they want to put you through it as well. It's just a dehumanizing and irrelevant process. In my opinion, you do stuff on a whiteboard that would never be done in a real world workplace. I like this example of Max Howell, who wrote Homebrew, which is, I don't know if 90% of Google engineers use it, but a lot of them do. It's a package management system for Mac. But he didn't invert a binary tree on a whiteboard, so they didn't hire him. So again, this is something that I just don't think is effective. I think a lot of us have been there. They have you memorizing and regurgitating algorithms in real time in an awkward situation, and you get the job, and then you're just debugging code. Then there's the on-site all-day gauntlet, I like to call it, which is, and this is from a real Forbes article. I thought it was The Onion at first, but you have to take a day off of work typically if you currently are working. A lot of people can't afford to do that or don't have the vacation time, so now you're filtering out a bunch of potential candidates. They said don't expect to eat at lunch. Remember, you're being evaluated. You may not manage more than a few bites of food. Excuse yourself and go eat in the restroom, and then jot down notes when you take a bathroom break. So this sounds pretty awful to me, and I think a lot of us have been there. And I think some companies are starting to do half days at least, but even a half a day can be pretty challenging to just take out of a regular work day. And then interviewing best practices. So that's a couple things to avoid, but here's some other tips. Avoid hyper-focus interviews. So if they're too focused, it's easy to miss out on a candidate that could fill another role potentially on the data team. And again, that hyper-focus, I think, comes back to doing those whiteboarding super technical questions that may or may not be relevant to the actual position at hand. And look beyond the algorithms and analysis, right? We just saw a survey that most data scientists and people in those senior level positions aren't looking for that. Algorithms can be looked up, they can be researched, they can be created on the job. But a solid functional understanding of data practices, best practices, curiosity, and less quantifiable skills are just as important. And don't create unnecessarily stressful environments, right? Remember, your interview process is one of the first impressions that candidate will have. A whiteboard test has literally scared off candidates that would have been perfectly good fits. So on to the kit, and this will be circulated out, I believe, with the recording. We have a set of questions and the way to uh, evaluate the responses. It's not super technical or focused. The data set, let's start with that. So, sorry, I've got some animations here. The data source, it could be internal or proprietary if domain expertise is important. If you don't want to have to set up an NDA and all that, it's probably easier to just use an open data set. That's easily understood by the entire interviewing population. So some examples are the Registry of Open Data on AWS. Data.gov has some great resources as well. Ideally, you want to get something that's a little bit clunky and too large to process in Excel. You're looking for expertise in languages like R or Python, but it's small enough to process on a single machine. So that person will likely be conducting this remotely on their personal equipment. So we want to be mindful of that. The data set we use is this, it was an open set. The link is here of beer review data from beeradvocate.com. And the reason I like this so much is the questions are really clear and simple. And the data itself has some things that needs to be cleaned up, and it's kind of a perfect example. It's about 1.5 million records, so it would be really clunky to work with in Excel, especially if you're doing any kind of crosstabs, pivots. But the first question is, which brewery produces the strongest beers by ABV percent? And this one has a nice little gotcha because there are multiple reviews per beer, obviously. And so if you're looking at a single brewery, you need to make sure that the candidates take into account that you don't want to count reviews twice. You need to count it at the beer level. Just a good example of analytics. If you had to pick 3 beers to recommend using only this data, which would you pick? This one's my favorite because it can be very basic, just looking at average reviews. That's what you're looking for in like a business analyst, versus very complex. If you're looking for someone to build out really complex recommendation systems, you may have someone implement a Bayesian approach and explain to your other uh, team members how they did it. And then which of the factors are most important in determining the overall quality of a beer? You can imagine how all of these questions would translate to a business setting. Which are the factors are most important to determining satisfaction with our product? If you had to pick a product to recommend to a customer based on their purchase history, which one? So it's combining a lot of different patterns that I've seen in general in data analytics. And then again, just another sort of recommendation type question. If I enjoy a beer based on these specific things, which one should I try? So the thing that's nice about these questions is it tests the following. It tests if you can read the data into R or Python. All right, that's step one. Typically, we've seen warning flags if a candidate is not willing to use one of these languages. This is where these are the languages that are being taught in all of the bootcamp programs, the MOOCs, the graduate level data science programs that are coming out. Obviously, the price tag is nice. I see a ton of organizations just moving away from SPSS and SAS and all that to Python and R. And then summarize and explore the data. It shows their ability to just get familiar with the data set. And then aggregation and manipulating. This is probably 75 to 80% of most data science work is getting it ready, manipulating it, wrangling it, doing some quality control on it, looking for outliers and such. And probably the most important, visualizing and communicating results. If you can't communicate what your findings are, then your analysis is essentially rendered useless. So we've seen candidates put a really nicely well documented R Markdown report together or a Jupyter notebook, and that's always nice to see. So administration of the test is timing. Now, enough time to adequately explore and analyze the data. I usually like to just give it to them over email, give them a week or so, and don't expect them to spend more than a few hours of their time. I always tell them that, and you can't expect obviously a person to conduct a full-blown analysis, but it's small enough that it can be done in probably 2 to 4 hours. And the format, I instruct the candidate to document their code and visualize the answers, just prepare a way to present the results. It could be literally as simple as an email, or some people have done full-blown, like I said, R Markdown documents. The nice thing about it is it more closely mirrors the working conditions of an actual job environment. And a lot of companies are distributed and hiring remote, but you have all the resources you need at your disposal. Uh, Single working parents can do this on a weekend. No one's taking time off, and then have them present either in person or virtually, depending on the requirements of the position. If they do come in, make sure that they're presenting to the right team. So if they're an advanced statistician, have them present to maybe your other more technical stakeholders. But if you expect that person to present business insights to execs, make sure that they're able to tailor that message accordingly. So now you've presented, or the presentation maybe goes an hour or two, and no one has to spend all day um, asking a person over and over the same questions for 8 hours. And I want to share a couple of results from this test. So these are 4 different submissions, all answering the same question. We wanted to look at um, average aroma and appearance by beer style. And so some people did a correlation matrix of the reviews. Some people did just a dot plot over here, a scatter plot with appearance on the Y and aroma on the X. This is at the beer style level. You can see here someone opted to just show all of the reviews. And then we have a bar chart here with the combined review scores in a list. So they're all very different. There's no right answer. I mean, there is when we get down to the math and making sure that their approach was sound and correct, but there's different styles and there's different ways of analyzing data. And one other quick note on this was that we gave this test to a really excellent candidate, and the findings looked perfect and well documented, but when it came to the communication time and we had a few questions and constructive feedback, that was not received well. So we immediately kind of realized the red flags that it wouldn't be a good cultural fit. So that's one thing that this really is helpful for, is gauge how they take feedback. So the elements of a successful response, this is how you can sort of grade it to some extent, is how well they summarize and explore the data. If there were severe outliers, something to look for. So one thing you can do is have a data person at your company, if you have one, take the test themselves and make sure that they're adjusting accordingly based on the entry or senior level of the candidate, so they have a way to sort of assess what's wrong and right and what they missed. Aggregate and manipulate the data, which is again a huge part. Data wrangling is most of the dirty work that we have to do. And then visualization and communication. How does that presentation end up going? Do they take questions and answer them effectively? So again, here's the components. We're looking at their coding and writing skills. We're looking at how they communicate their findings. Was it clear? Did they tailor their communication appropriately for the audience? And are they receptive to feedback and criticism? And again, test for the role. Make sure, if it's a business data analyst, you'd expect some aggregation, summary statistics, visualizing, communicating, but they're not doing advanced level machine learning. That's not, maybe that's what you need or not, but know what your role is that you're looking for. For a statistician, again, this may be a more complex beer recommendation system, and have them talk through that approach or how they would do it. An engineer, you could imagine, would be something like loading the data into a database. If you're working in the cloud, potentially get them access, let them load some data in there in a sandbox environment, and have them provide instructions to an analyst on how they'd query that data. That's how you'd expect these roles to sort of function in a real world setting. So I think we're just about done with 30 minutes. We'll have time for questions, but key takeaways, I just want everyone to hopefully learn something from this. I hope this is helpful, but let's be more inclusive and approachable as a field, right? That's what a lot of these great online programs are helping with. We need to grow the future of these data scientists and be more realistic about expectations, make sure that we're setting people up for success and not just throwing them in a room with data and hoping for the best. Know what you need. So remember the data maturity slide. do you actually need that advanced level statistician PhD, or do you need someone that's more a data analyst and will eventually potentially learn and get to that point if you need it? But there's a huge gap there that's being filled very rapidly, and it's important to understand which level of expertise you need. So you can use this test as an example in your hiring process, but if you want them to actually start to explore an internal data set, that's great. But this one's nice and easy and available online, so you're able to distribute it pretty quickly. And just some thanks to people that I've had discussions with and have contributed and wrote articles, and they're trying to make this industry and field just a better place for everybody. So we can go right into questions. The first one, there are a lot of newbies who finish 4 months plus bootcamp courses and claim themselves a data scientist without any undergrad degree and lacking true project experience. How do we distinguish them in a 30-minute interview? Right, that's a great question. For me, it's pretty clear right away. I would say gauging their written report, you can sort of tell if they've had any type of ability to consult, or if they have some co-op experience, or they were ever had to present a report in any manner, and how effective their communication skills are. That's how we usually tell. It's that presentation is where you're going to get, I think, the meat of what you're trying to get after. Now, of course, that's assuming they send back their report and it actually makes sense. Then you set up that follow-on presentation. Business analysts, data analysts, are they data scientists? Yeah, it's the question that everyone wants to know the answer to. And I just say, I asked a question at Strata. I said, raise your hand if you answer questions using data. And I think the entire room raised their hand, probably 400 people. And then I asked, how many of you call yourselves a data scientist? And only, I think, 15 people raised their hand. And I think part of it is this really poor attitude towards, you're not a true data scientist, or if you can't do X, Y, and Z, you're not a true data scientist. If you are answering questions with data, yes, you're doing data science. You're doing some component of data science. What are good mechanisms to assess the performance of a data scientist when one is not one, or when the manager is not tech savvy? Right. So that's a tough situation if you're trying to hire your first kind of tech savvy role or data scientist role. Um, Honestly, when I was in a similar position, and I went to a lot of meetups, and I met some people, and tried to do my hiring that way. Look for ambitious people that are presenting at these meetups, or that have a GitHub repository and project portfolio where they like to just analyze data um, for fun. Some of their data they may be interested in, for example, sports data. That's something I did for a while, and was a fun side project. But at that point, you probably want to reach into your network as much as possible, and even if you can get someone to just look through the test or take it for you. But I think you'll at least find a good cultural fit, and it will be clear if they answered the questions at least somewhat reasonably, I think, in that presentation, even if you're not completely tech savvy. Next is, how do you know if you're proficient enough in coding to apply for a data science job? Yeah, also a good question. I'd say challenge yourself to take this test. And we probably won't get to all the questions, but feel free to contact me. I'll keep going, but I've I've responded to people that have taken this test. So if you want to, I'm happy to take a look at it and give you some constructive feedback and let you know where you may or may not be lacking. But um, give yourself a couple hours and try it out. Do you also mix in some of the traditional questions in with the interview, or only tests? Yeah, I think at the end, when, or if you take them to lunch or something, it's always nice to get to know the person. Usually, I just ask what they like to do in their free time besides work. But getting that cultural fit and seeing how they communicate, there's just so much you learn from the candidate based on their coding and writing and communication. Are there any websites dedicated to data scientist job openings? I believe, I mean, I've usually just used to go to like the Indeeds of the world and LinkedIn career postings. I think there are even some that get sent out through certain groups like Open Data Science. So yeah, there's a bunch out there. I'm not really sure of the best ones right now, but um, some Googling should hopefully help. What would be your opinion of a potential candidate being very well versed in Alteryx, which has R and Python built in, but still beginning with R and Python outside of the Alteryx environment? So yeah, Alteryx is great. I've used it, and it's a great way to get started understanding the data kind of workflow. I think still learning the ins and outs of R and Python is super valuable for sure. You'll kind of understand the underpinnings and what's going on underneath the hood, but also have that flexibility. Oftentimes, you'll get to a company or a new place and they won't have Alteryx, for example, and the licensing cost can be a blocker. So, learning some basic R and Python will certainly be really valuable. But if a company is willing to use Alteryx to get you started and get in the door, that's great too. Would you recommend to gauge proficiency by peers or by business domain knowledge? By business domain knowledge, I'm not sure if you mean the company's domain itself, but um, I think by peers is always good, especially to evaluate that fit. Um, be engaged by someone tech savvy enough is nice too, to at least understand what level they'll be coming in at. Uh, Business domain knowledge, in my opinion, can always be learned. So when I started out in bioinformatics, I didn't know much about genetics, but I learned a lot of that on the job. That's not to say that people with that deep domain expertise in any certain company, that they'll be at that level right away. But uh, diving into the data and just learning it as you go is usually a good way to start. Is MATLAB considered a legitimate or valuable language in data science? Well, everyone's asking all the hard-hitting questions. I mean, definitely. I know I've worked with people that have used it. I have not used it extensively. It's definitely legitimate. It's again, believe it or not, it's that price tag. So you can get started with R and Python right now if you want to. And then how do you know a candidate won't post interview challenge questions online and use someone else's answers? I don't really. So that's, you have to, there's kind of an honor code here. But I think when they come in to present and you start asking specific questions, you'll probably be able to figure that out pretty quickly, whether they're just bluffing or not. Are you ever concerned that if you give too much time, the applicant is more likely to be able to seek help from friends? Yeah, same thing. I think I think that I expect it to be fleshed out in the presentation. So have some questions ready, ask about their process, what they were thinking when they did it, and then ask how they would maybe apply this to another data set, or what would they do to make it better? If you had more time, what would you implement? I think those sort of thought-provoking questions can really reveal just a person's way of thinking and how they would approach a problem. What if we are looking for someone with visualization skills in Tableau? Is this data set too large for that program? Yep, good question. Tableau, I like it a lot. We actually partner with them. The Tableau is only dependent on the data source itself. So if your data is in a database, or say it's really large data and you have it in something like Amazon Redshift, just column store, um, it'll be fine. Tableau just uses the database's horsepower to crank through the data. So assuming the data is in a suitable format, if let's say we're talking like a 5 gig flat file though, Tableau will probably have trouble with that. So you want to, if the data is large, it should be in a database, and then Tableau can connect to, it can connect to Hadoop, Hive, it can connect to with a whole bunch of data sources. How much do you value SQL? A ton. SQL is huge. So, that's one of those things where you probably would have to ask questions about their SQL expertise on the during the interview. I find usually our SQL, there's people, the overlap is pretty extensive. If people that tend to know R tend to have some SQL knowledge, especially because um, a lot of the functions are just very, very similar. So SQL is huge. Can't undervalue SQL by any means. Do online professional certificates count as advanced degree proof? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. To me, it shows that the person has taken initiative and is really looking to learn and advance their career. So it doesn't hurt at all. That's for sure. Is it fair to take into account someone with somewhat unrelated degree but a certificate experience such as data camp? Yeah. So it looks like there's a lot of questions around this that are related. There are quite a few people coming from boot camps, right? I don't have data to show success rates on any of that, but I do think again it shows initiative. It shows that they've gone online to learn, um, and I think this test could hopefully help gauge whether they're able to apply what they learned, and how good they are at communicating it. And I do think graduate degrees, online or undergraduate degrees. I know everyone's told that you have to get one, but some of the smartest, most effective people I've worked with didn't have a college degree. They just picked up coding as like a hobby, and so I definitely don't think you should discriminate by degrees, but based on the person and what they're able to show. Yeah, here's a sort of related question: is the requirement of having a master degree or PhD really necessary when hiring a data scientist? I've always said no. Uh, it depends on what you're doing. So I was the first non-PhD hire at a company, a bioinformatics company. I had a bachelor's degree in computer science and biology, and just learned a ton from uh, these mentors, essentially, and my boss. And if you have that capability, then it's certainly useful to bring in more junior level talent and train them up. It's obviously cheaper, and you're investing in someone that hopefully will stay there for a long time. Um, in general, I don't think they're not useful. I mean, the if you're doing again the advanced statistics and developing your own proprietary algorithms, for example, that's when you probably want someone with a some sort of foundation in statistics or um, and understands things like linear algebra and the ins and outs of that kind of stuff. So short answer is it's no. It depends on the requirements though. Yes, the test will be available. I'm going to work with DataCamp after this to make sure that you all get the links and information that you need. Am I hiring? Yes, we're always looking for additional help. Um, we have a lot of interesting stuff going on. We're talking with NASA currently. We're working with the Department of Defense, and there's a ton of data work. I'm sure you all are aware of that. So feel free to reach out. We're typically Data Camp is hiring too. Yeah, um, yeah. Feel free to reach out. Do you have a pre-screening method you would use? Yes, prior to this test. So yes, good question. I always have a phone call. It probably takes 5 minutes to understand if it's someone that we want to talk to further. And that's just a few questions of getting to know you. What are you looking for? And are you willing to take this test if I send it to you? Should I expect the data scientist should be able to handle ETL tasks? Right. Another good question. In my opinion, yes, basic ETL tasks. But if you're needing someone to set up an entire database and data warehouse, um, maybe in a startup, you're able to find someone that can do all of that. But ideally, you probably have a data engineering kind of team that's going to help plan your infrastructure, set it up, and make the data available to do some of the other ETL. But a data scientist themselves should be able to take a data file uh, and do something with it. If it's really, really large, that might be a little more difficult, but depending on the scenario level of the data scientist, they'll be able to figure that out. So yeah, ideally though, you want to have data engineers supporting your data scientists. I've been in positions where our infrastructure had no backups and our production data was just down, and you've got your data scientists working at 3 a.m. on like DevOps and maintenance, and you want your data scientists focused on extracting insights from your data, not as much on the ETL. Are the days of no specific technical skills required gone? I hope not. I'm trying to change that. Um, I do think there's a foundation now. I've been kind of saying that for a while now that almost everyone's going to have some type of data proficiency, the same way we had to all adapt to learning email 30 some odd years ago. Um, I think everyone should be able to dive into a spreadsheet at least, uh, look at some charts, create some charts, because it's just infiltrating every aspect of business at this point. I'd expect even a C-level person to have some basic chops at this point. the same way, like I said with email. Uh, do you anticipate non-structured data analysis to increase? What are your thoughts, and what do you recommend to get started learning in that domain? Uh, yeah, it's huge. So non-structured data, I typically think of, for example, free text. Super messy, a pain to work with. So getting started on, actually, Julia Silge has a really great article on tidy text that I'd recommend, where she analyzes some book chapters. That would be a great place to get started, at least on the free text space. But certainly lots of non-structured data being generated. The problem I have in interviews and feedback is I still don't have the professional experience needed. How can I compensate for that when changing career paths? Yeah, great question. As much as you can, start building up a portfolio. Um, Create your own experience, essentially, if you can. Uh, that is a tough place to be in, so I can understand. But if you have uh, a blog, or some way to put together, um, almost like your own mini projects, I think that that should be hugely valued. And if you explain that, honestly, in an interview, saying, look, I'm here to gain that experience and I'm willing to learn, and here's what I've been doing on this to compensate for that, I think that the right company would see that and give you a shot. Should we only consider candidates with a strong profile in Kaggle? Yeah. Also, if you're looking for that type of work, it certainly helps. I wouldn't only consider it because a lot of people just don't have the time. I started out on Kaggle myself, but it was when I was younger, and I had just started working in the space and was working one full-time job, not running a consultancy. And so uh, some people even work at companies that enable them to do that. So it's kind of, it's a self-selecting uh, vehicle, I think. So don't discredit candidates that don't have a Kaggle profile at all. But it's an easy way of, sure, if you're going to look for people that are going to feature engineer like crazy and build machine learning models and really improve accuracy of a model, I think it's a great place to go find those types. Any thoughts on group interviews where you would match groups based on complementary skills to test their skills and teamwork together? Yeah. So that's the way I would try to accomplish that is, um, I actually would probably look more at your internal group first. Like if you want the data scientist, the person coming in, let's say it's an analyst level, uh, have your engineers in the room so that they can communicate together and see how they interact. I think it might be tough to get several candidates for different roles at once, but if you can, I think it would be a great exercise to ask them how they would work together on solving these questions. But yeah, if you do, let me know because I'd be interested to hear how it goes. If I have a data analyst, would it be better to nurture him or her to become a data scientist, or better to hire an experienced person? Yeah, great question. I always think it's great to train people up within your organization because they have domain expertise. It's easier, it's cheaper. It's obviously costly if you hire the wrong person. If they want to learn, hopefully that if that person wants to learn, then that's a great opportunity to train them up. But if you're really looking to build out an entire team and you don't have anyone senior for them to learn from, it would be good to have an experienced person for them to at least lean on and ask some tougher technical questions of. Should someone learn both R and Python? Do you have a preference? Yeah, well, always learning both is good. So I use both. Here's my honest opinion is I can code R in my sleep only because that's what I was taught. R was made by statisticians for statisticians, and that's kind of some people's biggest gripe with R. Uh, so my domain expertise from when I came into the field was R. I did learn Python to do some automation. I love it for text parsing, for using Beautiful Soup and web scraping. um, so I use both, and I think knowing both is really valuable because Python's still widely used in a lot of production environments and preferred. R you can use in production. There's a lot of good resources out there if you want to reach out to me to talk more about that. Will you test managers of data scientists and statisticians when hiring? If so, how? If not, why not? Will you test managers of data scientists? Yeah. Well, I think I understand the question. Like, do you want to the manager should take the test, I think, or at least understand what they're looking for in the test to help gauge. Um, Managers, yeah, I think it's fair to give anyone any level that they're coming in this kind of test. But if you're not expecting that manager to ever really be hands-on or mentor at a technical level, if they're really just focused on more the high-level business strategy and using that data to answer questions, maybe not. So that's going to be up to you and your specific role for that manager, I think. Have you had to accommodate for people with disabilities and accommodations to use the tools we all take for granted? How to remain inclusive to all? Really great question. I have not had to. Um, it's a really it's a really good question. Something we should all be thinking about. I think there's tools coming out, hopefully, for people to be able to type and code. Um, but no, I haven't had to yet, and I like that thought though, and it's something we should think about. Is it always necessary to have a business analyst, statistician, and engineer to solve data problems? Not always, no. I think, again, like the statistician, for example, unless you're doing really advanced statistics and machine learning, probably not. Um, Engineer, if you have small data that's just disparate and you don't really need to, you're not at a point where you need like a data warehouse, maybe you don't need the engineer. Um, so it will depend on your needs, but it's not always necessary to have them all, no. All right. Thank you for all the questions. That was great. I was happy to be here, and I hope that you found at least something valuable that you could take away from this. We couldn't get them to them all, but you can reach out to me if you go. I'm on Twitter at Tanya Cash 21. Our TCB Analytics has a handle. You can go to our website and contact us through the form directly as well. Um, but thanks for attending, and a final reminder that the slides and recording will be sent to you via email sometime tomorrow. Thanks all.